Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Mindset Season 2. We are going to be discussing a really cool topic today, and it's entitled Don't Let This Get Under Your Skin. It's about skin temperature, which is abbreviated SKT. We will explain a little bit more about that in just a moment, but we'll be moving right along to introductions. And okay, so unfortunately, if you've noticed, Michelle is not with me today, but I do have some great guests that will be helping me talk about this topic. My name is Kathryn Ambroze, and I am the Manager of Behavioral and Marketing Sciences with HCD Research. I'm going to be talking a little bit about HCD before we hop into our topic. So just a bit about HCD. It's a research house and provides research on consumers by looking into how they perceive, evaluate, and respond to different stimuli across products, communications, or just general consumer experience. And we use a combination of these tools that we call applied consumer neuroscience, which involves psychology, physiology, as well as traditional market research methods to understand how the consumer is experiencing whatever that stimuli may be. The stimuli ranges from early stages of exploration all the way to final product validation. And what's really great about our methodologies is that they can be done absolutely anywhere in the world, in person or online. Our guests are actually based in the UK today, so I'm so happy to have them with me. We are actually going to be discussing one of the most, in my opinion, underrated tools of psychophysiology, which is skin temperature. But without further ado, I am happy to introduce both Simon and Sean to Mindset with our vidcast. So please both introduce yourselves when you would like to get started.
Hi there, my name is Sean Rooney. I'm based at London School of Economics, where I work as the Scientific Officer and Head of Laboratory Innovation. What that basically involves is training and supporting students through their research, along with staff, advising them on design, implementation, occasionally kind of what to do with the analysis, and of course making sure that the laboratory is up to spec and everything's working as it should.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Simon Noyce. I'm a researcher and behavioral consultant. I'm also a chartered psychologist, and over my career I've been involved with a range of research. Some of my primary interests are psychophysiology, so it's really exciting to get a chance to talk about some of these new innovations in terms of using skin conductance response and, in this case, skin temperature.
Awesome, great. So let's hop right into the topic actually and get an idea of exactly what we're talking about here. Well, I don't know if this is a well-known fact, but the largest organ in the body is in fact skin, and we are warm-blooded. So that kind of implies that we generally don't fluctuate our temperature between we don't go from hot to cold very quickly. So it is generally around the idea of having our bodies around 37 degrees Celsius for our UK friends, and as well as having it around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. When you're at the dentist, when you're at the doctor, people tend to check their temperature and make sure that they're somewhere around there when they're trying to make sure that they don't have a fever or any type of ailments or illness. But why, can you guys help me explain exactly why the body does regulate and in what ways it regulates?
So essentially when we're talking about regulation, what our bodies like to do is maintain what we call homeostasis, that resting point between high levels of activation and relaxation. So under normal circumstances, our autonomic nervous system will take control of this. And as we increase our stress levels, the sympathetic side of our nervous system kicks in, and that results in things such as vasoconstriction and vasodilation, which basically regulates the supply of blood to and from various bodily organs. In the case of skin temperature, the reason that we get hot is when vasodilation kicks in, and that's when our capillaries open up, increasing blood supply to the skin. And conversely, the reverse is true, that when we are cold to touch, that's due to vasoconstriction, where our autonomic nervous system shuts down the blood supply to the skin.
Right, exactly. And I think that it's really fair to say that there are many different contexts that can influence your skin temperature. You said you're trying to get that level of homeostasis at all points, but there is a little bit of variability. And Sean, do you want to kind of go into what types of contexts could affect your skin temperature?
Yeah, I mean, there's various ones. The obvious one would be sort of the temperature of the environment you're in. So in a cold environment, your body wants to maintain its heat, its core temperature, so it draws the blood in closer to the body to keep that temperature up. In warm climates, it's going to try and release and lose heat, so again, the blood kind of comes close to the surface. And then, again, other things like activity levels. If you're being really physically active, you're going to generate excess heat, and the body wants to try and lose that heat as quickly as possible. So we sweat, but also the blood dilation as well. And even things like nerves, stress levels, all those type of things trigger a response in the body. And depending on the conditions, we have a change in temperature. So, for example, when you're nervous or scared, you get a bit of a rush of adrenaline, and that tends to make you feel a bit cold and clammy. And that's kind of a good example that you're under a lot of stress.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a great segue into the next slide, where we are giving a better idea of exactly what is skin temperature, what causes skin temperature to change, and the real reason behind it changing is the blood flow. So that's kind of what goes with the cheeky title of this slide right here. And if anyone wants to, feel free to jump in and share what exactly is the reason that blood flow influences skin temperature. Take it away.
Now, I was going to say, so on a basic level, a lot of the heat contained is in the fluids of the body. So where the blood is flowing, it's kind of where the heat's going to be centralized. So that idea of blood pumping around the body, it is kind of moving temperature, but also other nutrients and things like that. So it's that where that flow goes is what's going to dictate where the temperature is being drawn to.
Exactly. And I think that Simon touched on this earlier by bringing up that idea of vasoconstriction and vasodilation, that does have a big influence, because if you're constricting blood flow, then of course that is going to affect your skin temperature, because if you're constricting it, then it'll make you colder. And the inverse of that is also true. So you want to keep those things in mind. And it's really where the blood is transported, that's what's going to be causing that change in temperature. I really quickly want to touch on just a general definition of what skin temperature is under the context of psychophysiological tools. It's really just a measure, and this was already shared, but just to repeat it, it's a measure of indicating certain affective states such as stress or tension. And I know that was mentioned, but it really does involve the sympathetic nervous system and how it's activated. So like we said, the blood goes away when there's vasoconstriction from peripheral systems like your fingers, and it goes towards your internal locomotive muscles, because that creates less blood flow, lower skin temperature, and that all takes place when you have that experience of fight or flight, actually. And which makes sense when you're trying to prepare yourself to either run away or get prepared to fight. So there is a thing to be said, though, that since skin temperature does in fact want to be at homeostasis, there's really little change within it. And the magnitude that it changes is only about maybe 1 degree Fahrenheit. So it's really, really a minimal change. And that change can be due to an emotional event like being stressed. And we see that typically within the 15 seconds of whatever that event is. So it's a very slow moving measure. And I think that's really important to remember when considering using skin temperature in your physiological research. Do either of you have anything you want to add to anything I've said, or feel free, we could just move on?
No, should we move forward?
Let's move forward, because I think the next part is actually, Simon and Sean are both awesome enough to do a little demo for us. So we could hop to the next slide, and I'll let you both take it away for explaining exactly what you're doing and then how easy it is to use skin temperature in physiological research.
So what we've got set up here is basically a bioimpact system, which is kind of one of the kind of a piece of equipment out there that you can measure various different kind of physiological measures, and temperature being one of them. And what we have here is just a little kind of device that we can Velcro on to people. And you can see here, there's a simple cable, and at the end, if I can get there, there's a metal temperature gauge, and that basically just gets attached to the finger, and then this will kind of read the temperature and kind of give a kind of an electric current back, which Biopack and the software interpret to give us a full-on output. So it's really quite simple to use. What we would do is, I'm just going to borrow Simon, you might not be able to see it in camera actually.
It might also be worth explaining at this point that what we're really dealing with is a resistor that varies in relation to temperature. So as the resistor gets hot, it allows the current that's being passed through the Biopack to flow more readily. And it's that change in voltage that's being picked up by the system and amplified, and that's being transferred into a temperature reading.
That's a good point to make, is that the voltage is changed over to temperature, and it's actually the temperature change is what's being analyzed when we look back at it. But you can see right now that Sean is doing a really great job of putting just a little bit of medical tape on Simon's finger. And that's really all it takes to get a measure of the skin temperature. Of course, you need to get a baseline so that you can measure things from baseline. But it really is that when you convert the signal to the degrees, it will help the researchers to eventually then analyze the data and get an understanding of what's exactly happening. So let's hop on to the next area. I'll let Simon take the sensor off his finger whenever he wants. And so the real story between cold hands and warm heart, it's really just trying to give an example of why stress is actually the inverse when it comes to the relationship between stress and skin response. Do either of you want to explain a little bit more of that? I know that Simon had touched on this a bit earlier.
Sure. So the thing to remember is, obviously, if we're entering any form of stress response, such as the fight or flight response, our body's prime concern is getting ready to evade a situation or to stand its ground. You don't want your blood at your extremities, or even in your gut for that matter. You want it where it can actually be used to mobilize yourself for action. So as a result of this, we get this term vasoconstriction occurring, where the sympathetic nervous system is going to reduce the blood supply, in this case, to my hands and my fingers. So that blood's then available to your main skeletal muscles, say your legs or your arms. As a result, that vasoconstriction means there's less blood flow, and that will effectively register as a reduction in temperature. So as stress goes up, skin temperature goes down, which is the kind of take-home message.
Yes, great point. And if you want, you can just click ahead right now. There is one example of somebody that is going hiking and then they run into a bear, and that's terrifying. I'm grateful that while I was on my hike this weekend, that did not happen to me. And it was when you come into contact with a bear, immediately you're going to have that type of response that Simon was just talking about. And you're going to experience that fight or flight experience where you're like, okay, what should I do here? What's the right move to make? And at that point, while you're making that decision, all of your blood is really going internal to the internal muscles to really get that decision moving for fight or flight. And if we keep going, it's the vasoconstriction then takes place. And that's why your fingers are so cold, because of that vasoconstriction. And it, again, is going more to those locomotive muscles that is really helping to prepare you to make your next move, whether that be to fight or to flight. It's really just to help you to make some type of decision. And I want to open up the floor here before we move on to discuss a little bit more of the practical applications of using skin temperature. I think it's important to note that this should be used in more long-lasting stimuli. You shouldn't be measuring it with something that's really quick, because it's hard to get an understanding of what exactly is causing it. There are also some other limitations that I know that Simon and Sean were kind of discussing earlier. So if you guys want to mention that now, this would be great.
So I think one of the key things to remember with any measure of arousal is that on their own, they're not always that reliable. So often we'd use multiple readings such as heart rate interval, for example, skin conductance response, or even blood pressure, alongside things like skin temperature.
Absolutely.
And again, it's about getting your sampling window correct, that some of these items are very good at picking up fast change, others change quite slowly and less dramatically. So obviously they need handling in a different kind of format.
I think it's also probably worth mentioning that some of these measures, again, in isolation, tell you there's a change in the body, but without context, it's difficult to say. So, for example, if you're excited or happy, your heart rate would go up. But equally, if you're scared, nervous, or angry, your heart rate would go up. The same with skin temperature, certain elements of that. So it's good to kind of have other measures from sort of a subjective perspective. So you'd be asking the participant, or you'd have a very well-controlled context or environment that you can limit the kind of variables that are causing that change.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that's also worth bearing in mind is going back onto Sean's comment. Physiologically speaking, our body can't differentiate between fear and excitement. That process of differentiation is a cognitive one, what we call valence, and that's the label you apply to the experience. And in many situations, that's the difference between standing your ground and fighting or running. So yeah, I think we often use these terms very casually, but there are specific reasons why we talk about arousal, or in this case, skin temperature, rather than the emotional aspects that go with that.
That's a great point. I think that is something that frequently as market researchers, you have to remind people, even though the technology is really exciting and it does give you this, it's non-invasive, it gives you this idea of something that you wouldn't have gotten from the person just sharing it with you, because people don't know their skin temperature off the top of their head. But it is important to remember the value in getting, self-reporting, because we will never truly know what is causing it unless the person is sharing their conscious awareness of what's happening. Because, and sometimes you have a change even if you're not consciously aware of it. And so it's kind of that balance of finding both and really getting an understanding of what context that person's in during that period of time that the recording is happening. So that way you can really dive into the data that's collected and say educated guesses on why skin temperature is fluctuating, is changing.
I think it's probably worth also pointing out that, like, all these measures, you mentioned that there's a lot of difference between people or situations. So you can't just take a measurement in isolation. You need what we call a baseline, right? So you need a measure of them at rest or not doing much. We have kind of a time period where we can go, this is their normal. And any changes from that mark would be a measure that we look at, rather than just kind of an absolute number. That's not always that useful to a researcher.
Context is really key. It helps give everything, a painting to work off of. And, if you just have one color of the whole picture, that's not really going to explain much. But once you have the whole rainbow in there, you all of a sudden have a masterpiece that you can put together. So I think that is a nice analogy I just came up with to go with along with what you were sharing. But it is a really useful tool to be able to utilize if you are already looking into using physiological measures. And it can help to provide a little bit more in-depth analysis into an experience that you might not get from just doing a survey. That's one of the great things about psychophysiological measures in general, that it provides a little bit more context on what the internal body is experiencing while you're, going through whatever exposure is being, implemented. So that is really a good point to bring up here.
The other thing that's worth mentioning with skin temperature, it's probably the most accessible measurement you're going to have for physiological change as well. So if you want to try this out yourselves, if you're maybe looking at it from an educational point of view, you can buy a one-wire skin or one-wire thermometer that you can hook up to most microcontrollers, and you can import that data really easily into a whole range of packages, such as the Arduino chipset, for example. So unlike a lot of the other measures, it really does give the opportunity to have a try for minimal cost and minimal experience.
That's a really good point to bring up, that it actually is pretty accessible in comparison to the cost of something like an EEG cap, where it is, you're really investing in that when you are, it's kind of a commitment right there. So it's nice to have this as a good, reliable tool to utilize, as well as having an easy way to implement it. From that demo that we saw earlier, it's really clear that it's not hard to understand how to, utilize it. It's not hard to explain it to the participant that is, experiencing it. So I do think that this is a really useful tool and has a lot of potential for being applied in applied consumer neuroscience. I do want to also mention before we hop off, because I know that I want to just thank you both for joining, but we do have white papers on skin temperature that are available, as well as references. So that way, if somebody is interested in learning more about this, there are literature options for you to go explore, see a little bit more in depth, and get a better idea of how this tool is actually applied. I think it's really important to remember that this tool has there are options with using it. It just has to be used correctly, and it has to be used in the right context for it to really be valuable. Otherwise, there's real no point in using it if you don't know what you're doing with it, as I know both of you would probably agree. But with that being said, we can move on to the next slide. And I just want to thank everyone for joining today, as well as please subscribe to our YouTube page. It is a place where we have a lot of information, such like these, where we have little tidbits of bits on psychophysiological measures, as well as different opportunities within market research to apply consumer neuroscience. So if you want, this is your opportunity to subscribe. Ta-da! And then we'll just move on to the next spot. So really quickly, I just want to mention that you can contact either Michelle or myself. Sean and Simon, what are the best ways for you to get reached if if anybody has questions for you?
For me, probably just you can find my details on the London School of Economics Psychology Behavioral Science page. I'm listed there under professional services, so that's got all my details. That'd be the best way to get on to me.
Great.
I think for myself, probably the easiest thing would be to go onto the British Psychological Society list of chartered psychologists, and I'm locatable there.
Okay, wonderful. And I want to mention that we are very active on LinkedIn as well. So there's a lot of material available on LinkedIn. Are either of you on LinkedIn currently, or?
I am, yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll have all of their contact information available in the description bar. But if you do have any questions for them, please contact them through that. But I want to thank you both for joining me today. I really appreciate having some help explaining how to utilize these tools and really get a better understanding of how they're useful and places to use them. So with that being said, thank you so much to both of you for joining me today. And I am excited to use this tool in the future. Thanks, everybody. Until next time. Bye.
Bye. Bye.